We are learning about how prednisone causes weight gain. I am Dr. Megan, the Prednisone Pharmacist, and I did a survey, and over half of the people, their number one complaint was weight gain and what they can do about it. So I am addressing that today. So how does prednisone cause weight gain? Throughout this presentation today, first we'll talk about some statistics about prednisone weight gain. Next, we'll talk about what the drug actually does. And then finally, we'll talk about what other side effects are contributing to the hunger and the weight gain. So first of all, in one study, not mine, a different one, it said that 70% of prednisone users gain weight while they're on prednisone. And so how much? So another study found that if you're on a low dose, which is 5 to 10 milligrams per day for 2 years, you can expect to gain 4 to 8% of your weight. So if you just round up to 10%, and let's say you started out at 120 pounds, 10% of that is 12 pounds, so you'd end up at 132. A lot of people in Facebook groups and things ask, when do I gain weight? When does it go away? Lots of questions about the when. And so the big takeaway is if you're only on prednisone for a short time, you are not likely to gain weight. In fact, it's a possibility that you could lose weight because when prednisone first starts, it causes something called lipolysis, which is a breakdown of fat cells. And so you can actually lose weight at the very beginning, just like the first few weeks. But then the longer time that you're on prednisone, the more likely that you will gain weight. And so then the question is, what about moon face? So the round face that's shaped like the moon, that is dose dependent. So as your dose goes higher, the chances of having moon face go up. So if you're on 60 milligrams, most people get moon face at that point. But if you're only on 5 milligrams, it's more rare to have moon face. On this side, we're going to talk about how prednisone causes weight gain. So first of all, you take the prednisone. And what that does is it replaces the cortisol in your body. Cortisol is the hormone that keeps us alive in emergencies by being the fight or flight hormone. So if there is a tiger chasing you, you can either fight the tiger or you can run as fast as you can. And in order to do either of those things, you need a big jolt of energy. And that energy is coming from sugar. And so your body says, okay, here's a ton of sugar really fast so that you can run as fast as you can. And so your liver kicks out a bunch of sugar, and your whole body just makes the sugar available so that those muscles can work fast. And that works really well to save you from a tiger. But when we are on prednisone, the tiger never goes away. There is always some cortisol floating around, and by cortisol I mean the prednisone floating around, that's making you still feel that stress, that, oh my goodness, I'm about to be eaten, even though you're not, you're just taking prednisone. And so there's constantly higher sugar in your blood. That's called glucose. So a higher blood glucose. And when there's higher blood glucose, that leads to fat storage. So the fat cells suck up that sugar and store it. So that's one way. Then another thing is prednisone stops our bodies from the normal signals that tell us we're full. So there's a hormone, it's called leptin, and leptin is released by the fat cells saying, okay, you've eaten enough, it's time to stop eating. And so even though your body is still releasing leptin, somehow, and we're not really sure how, prednisone makes it so that your body is resistant to leptin. So you actually have higher levels of this hormone that's supposed to tell you you're full, more of that is floating around in your blood, but you're not feeling full. Somewhere in the whole cascade of things, that message isn't being received. So somehow it's not going where it's supposed to, and so your fat cells release more and more of this leptin, and it gets higher and higher. And the more it's not being used, the higher resistance. And that same thing happens with insulin. So there's a thing called insulin resistance, and that leads to type 2 diabetes. And this is all related in prednisone as well. So then we already talked about how the liver releases sugar so that you can run away from that tiger. Then because there's so much sugar in your blood spilling over, then your kidneys are peeing out sugar. Now that's like one of the main signs of diabetes. So basically you have too much sugar in your blood, and that makes it thicker and harder to pump. That's harder on your heart. And now you have too much sugar in your pee, and now your fat cells are storing that sugar as fat. All of those things that prednisone is doing to you leads to weight gain. There's a lot. So this is more about how prednisone causes weight gain and hunger. So back to cortisol, that's what prednisone is imitating. When there's more cortisol than your body normally has, then you can get Cushing's syndrome. And that's basically a description of what it is like to have too high of cortisol. All of the changes that happen. So one of the changes that you're probably all very familiar with is the moon face. And so that is the first main way prednisone causes weight gain. Second is part of that Cushing syndrome is the fat redistribution. So you might have had some great love handles, some nice round hips. Maybe you had round arms and little chubby legs before prednisone. And what it will do is redistribute that fat. So he'll take that fat that's on your thighs and move it to the places you don't necessarily want it either. You don't really want it on your face or on the back of your neck, like on your shoulder area. They call that the buffalo hump. And you definitely don't want it on your belly fat, because that is the most dangerous kind of fat, because it has so much inflammation involved. And so that's what the Cushing syndrome does, is it moves that fat around into those other places. So other side effects that prednisone cause are muscle loss and bone loss. So the muscle loss, it breaks down muscle tissue, and I don't know if you've noticed, but your legs and arms might be skinnier than they usually are, and that's because of the muscle disappearing. It's being broken down, and so when there's not as much muscle, and then there's a huge cascade of problems that lead to bone loss, like osteoporosis from prednisone. I will go way more in depth in that on another broadcast, but the combination of losing muscle mass and bone mass means that there's lower lean body mass, and lean body mass is what we need to have a low resting metabolic rate. So if you hear somebody saying, oh, I have a high metabolism, they're saying that just sitting there, they are breaking down sugars and not gaining weight. That's the resting metabolic rate. And so when you have lower amounts of muscle and bone, that means you have a lower rate of breaking down sugar, which means you're just sitting there, you're using less calories than you used to. And so that increases your weight gain. Next is prednisone is what we call a mineralocorticoid. That means it changes the balance of salt and fluid in your body. And the way it does this is by changing how much salt you have. So it will make you crave salt. It will make you, your kidneys will get rid of potassium and will hold in sodium. And all of this causes bloating and water retention. And all of that means you can have more moon face, and it's harder for your heart to pump all of this extra fluid. So that's another way prednisone causes weight gain. Next are mood changes. So if you're lucky, you haven't experienced this. If not, the mood changes we're talking about include, this kind of goes back to the high cortisol, is there's not as much space between something hard and your reaction to it. So if your kid spills milk, you normally can react really patiently and kindly to that. But while on prednisone, you might completely flip out and start screaming at your kid or something. Or you're driving on the freeway and you normally could handle somebody cutting you off, but on prednisone, you want to chase them down and shoot them or something. So those mood changes are from that high cortisol. There are other ones that might make you less able to resist temptation, or it might be the nightmares. All of these things come together to make it so that you have less tolerance for dealing with food temptation. So you might binge. And one of the main takeaways from this is do not starve yourself while you're on prednisone. You can't afford to use your good will and patience throughout the day on starving yourself. It's not going to cure the weight gain, and it will make it even more likely that you will binge instead of just eating steadily, healthfully. Finally, I went through this in a lot of depth last week about sleep, is that normally there are fat storage hormones and other hormones that are released while you're sleeping that help you to manage all of the weight as far as getting rid of the wrong things and keeping the good things. But when the sleep is interfered with, then it can interfere with your ability to not gain weight. So if you want to know more about it, listen to last week's. So basically, there are many factors that can lead to prednisone causing weight gain and making you feel hungry. That leptin causes you to, the prednisone doesn't let leptin keep your blood sugars steady, and you feel hungry all the time. And so we will talk more in depth about what you can do about this. And I'd love you to comment below about what other questions you have about prednisone causing weight gain. And I've enjoyed teaching you about prednisone and weight gain today. Finally, I will tell you about the upcoming broadcasts we'll be doing. Next week, we'll talk about the consequences of prednisone weight gain. The following week, on March 28th, we'll talk about which foods to avoid while on prednisone. And on April 4th, we will talk about one of my favorite topics, which is what foods do we need while on prednisone. And then in a month, on April 11th, we will talk about how to get the right nutrition while on prednisone. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll talk to you next week.